Hi everyone. So just while I'm making videos about dissertations, I realised I started these slides a while ago. This is my fast and furious overview of how you might think about a research dissertation, a traditional research dissertation. This is absolutely not the definitive way of doing it. Different people will have different views, different ideas. This may or may not be useful to you, but I'm hoping it might be, and if it is, that's great. So what do I want to talk about? I want to give you an overview of a research dissertation as a final product, to break that down a little bit, and to talk about some of the key bits of knowledge that I think might help get you there. I'm going to try and do it quick, say fast and furious. So first of all, initial interests and defining some sort of vague topic. Most of you have already got here, but just I was going to say, what have you got in your previous studies? Is there something contemporary in the news, something from your work experience or recent life, or something that you've always been interested in? There's a platform called Dissertations for Good run by the NUS. They have some ideas for themes that may fit in with a sustainable development overview, often developed in participation with real world actors. That can be quite cool. Talk to people who really do stuff. I don't know, you get a local counsellor in one of your workshops, ask them, hey, I'm doing a dissertation, is there anything that you think would be really good for someone to investigate? Ask questions at presentations, at guest lectures. What are we missing? Is there an opportunity to develop something? If you were writing an undergraduate dissertation about what you've just written, do you think there are interesting things and important things to write about? Whole load of sources and opportunities for stimulation. So get out there, get interested in the world, and find something that fascinates you. Because if you don't, your dissertation will be a struggle. My personal advice, don't pick something that you think is clever and important or whatever if you don't actually care. It is your passion, your enthusiasm, in my opinion, that will help you get through what is a hard process, and likely to drive you to work hard, to do what needs to be done to produce something that's high quality. I'm very much about going with my heart. Other people may have other ideas, and obviously there has to be some kind of check on that, but hopefully you get my point. I just wanted to talk, this is a really old slide, hopefully it makes sense to me, about research process. Just some kind of concepts about the type of research you might want to do. Empirical research is about going and using our sensory perceptions to decide what is the nature of social reality. One option in terms of research is to go look at this social reality and to think about what that means. And we can do that in a place potentially where no one has ever thought about this before. So something that's like a particularly unique area or really specific. And we can do a thing that's called abductive research. We can start to create the very first bits of knowledge that have ever existed. This is quite unlikely that this is a possibility, but it's just to give you the conceptual framework. This is a possibility. And what we can do there is we start to build this idea of theory that might understand what's going on. More importantly, that explains and predicts. So I find a completely and utterly unique situation as far as I'm concerned. I do empirical research. I draw out the findings of that and say, maybe if I found these exact circumstances somewhere else, I can use what I know from there to predict what would happen in this new place, even before I've seen it. What's more common, possibly, is the idea that we're going to do inductive research. So we're going to be looking at something that we already have a bit of knowledge about, but maybe taking a new perspective, asking a new question. And again, we're going to move from a single case to see if it can be extended to a general rule. So maybe my literature review says that someone else did some previous research in this particular situation. They found these variables produce this outcome. Where people really cared about recycling, they did it more. I'm then going to take that idea and going to try and test that in a broader sense. So maybe I'm going to do some sort of survey amongst a representative sample of the population that says, my research question being, if these people really care, do they recycle? And therefore my survey question is going to be, how much do you care about recycling, scale of 1 to 10? How much recycling do you do, scale of 1 to 10? And I'm going to see if that individual original idea is applicable to a wider sense, a sort of a wider sample of society. The other way round is to take what is already a general theory, so the sun rises every morning, and I'm going to apply it to a particular case tomorrow. My research is going to be waking up tomorrow, looking in the sky. Has this general theory once again been upheld, or will I find an instance in which case it falls down? Because if tomorrow the sun didn't come up, yes, we'd have some pretty big problems, but it would be a fantastic research finding, because for millions of years, people have believed every day that the sun comes up. I find the instance where it doesn't. Therefore, I'm able to dismiss entirely this idea that every day the sun comes up. Let's think about something more applicable. What's a potential universal theory? That let's stick with another stupid one. The more dogs per head of population in a country, the higher the GDP is. Every other study ever has found, where we get high numbers of dogs, we get high GDP. People have done regressions and they found this to be statistically significant. I go off to Malawi, I count the number of dogs, and realize that Malawi's, even though it doesn't have many dogs, is one of the richest countries in the world. Amazing research finding. I say this universal rule is not true, because I've got one instance in which I can disprove it, and that gets me my Nobel Prize. So just very quickly, 3 types of basic logic, basic research. Abductive research, where no one knows anything and you just go out into the world and kind of see what there is and try and do what you can. Very unlikely to happen. The next one, inductive research, where someone said, I looked at this one thing, and you say, right, I'm going to take this one very specific circumstance, test it more broadly. Deductive research, I'm going to take this broad theory that's widely upheld to be true, and I'm going to test it again in one individual case to see if it remains valid. So that kind of language, have a think about your dissertation. Which type of research are you doing? And write that in your methodology, understand it, and that'll show good learning. Let's just have a think about what sort of process social scientific research might take. Hopefully this makes sense. I'm just going to talk through my old slides. You're stimulated to do some research because you have to and because you find something you're passionate about. No point starting from scratch. Stupid. Absolutely need to find out, what do we already know about this? What's in the current literature? So we're going to do our literature review. We're going to try and define a question out of that. So we're going to find either a question that hasn't been answered, which could come from many possibilities. So maybe let's go back to the dogs and GDP. People have done this research in every single country except Malawi. I look through the literature and I go, here we are. No one's ever looked at Malawi as far as I know. That's my unique contribution. So I define my research question or my hypothesis, and I say my hypothesis is that in Malawi, if there's a high amount of dogs, it'll be high GDP, or vice versa, whatever, and I go away and test that. And we might sort of, this isn't a linear process. There's lots of circling around, and indeed we may come back at the end. So those two things interact. We read, we define a question, we read a bit more, we slightly change our question until a point in which we're relatively happy. We also start thinking about theories. So are there existing theories that explain certain observations in the world? So I'm interested in dogs. I go away and do my literature review. I realize that there's this theory that the more dogs there are, there'll be higher levels of GDP in countries. And I think, that gives me a theoretical framework to go and test. That's kind of cool. And again, all these things cycle around together. Out of this, so then comes my question. So my focus really of my whole research, my specific question, and maybe a theoretical idea. So then next I'm going to think about, well, if I want to go away and test to see if the number of dogs in Malawi is relevant to the level of GDP, how will I do this? I'm probably going to go and there's no record at the moment of the number of dogs, so I'm going to go around and I'm going to count them. I'm going to drive around in a Land Rover with my friend, or something like that. Potentially, my research question is more likely that I'm going to need to do interviews with key stakeholders. Maybe I'm trying to do some inductive research, so I'm going to be doing a survey of whatever population I think is relevant. Once I've decided my methodology, I'm going to start thinking about my specific research instruments. So I'm going to do interviews. I'll need an interview schedule, so a list of possible questions. I'm going to need a survey, so I'm going to have to decide, is that going to be on paper? Is it going to be oral? Is it going to be structured, unstructured? Is it going to be online? How is this going to work? Am I going to look at newspapers, whatever? And then I get into, well, if I'm going to look at newspapers, there's a library in Malawi with all the newspapers in it. That's great. If I'm going to do interviews, actually, because I'm quite well connected, I can go and talk to all the ministers. If I'm doing a survey, well, maybe I can only really get to the capital, so I'll do that on paper and I'll talk to certain neighbourhoods there. So I'll develop my interview schedule, which is based upon the background knowledge I've done in my literature review. I'll build my survey, which is based around, again, the background knowledge, what's already been done, etc. And I'll probably want to trial it, because the first survey that you write probably will be worded really badly. And if you go around and ask 3,000 people those questions, the data you'll get back is nonsense. So get it peer reviewed, get experts to look at it, get your supervisor to look at it, get your friends to look at it. But before you go away and survey 3,000 people, survey 5 people, look at the data and think, is this the data that I want? Does this data answer or help me answer the questions I've got? Very likely, the answer is no. Every time I've gone out to do field research, the plane journey has been usually me sitting there with the project team, us reading through our interview questions, realizing that the wording of them makes no sense. So that's the sort of the peer review. When we've got in country, the first thing we've done is said, right, we're going to go to this place. It's probably not even going to be part of our ultimate data set. We're going to do 5 interviews, 5 surveys with 5 people, then come back and look at it and say, does this work? Once we're pretty happy, we are going to go and do this for real. We're going to generate our research data. My personal perspective is that I always use the word generate data. A lot of people say going and finding data. And I think this is, from my sort of ontological and epistemological position about how the world is, I don't believe that there's data just lying around. The data is created through a dialogue between the researcher, who has picked the question, kind of is making certain assumptions, has framed the questions in a certain way, and with participants or with the world. So for me, data is created through a dialogue. It's not just found. If I go and ask you, do you like dogs? You say yes. Although you could argue that your opinion was already out there, the very fact I've asked you that question and not do you like cats has meant that I have played into that process. So my term, data generation. Interesting thing to think about maybe. So generate your data. You've got your data, you analyze it. Lots of different ways of doing this. I'm probably not, no point talking about this. At this stage, you might think, actually, the data I've generated doesn't really help me answer my question. This isn't a bad thing in any way. You don't need to feel bad about this. Yes, you might have made a colossal mistake for which you shouldn't have done, but it's not the end of the world. You just change your question. If your data doesn't answer one question, find a question that it does answer and try to argue or find a way in which that is a valid, important thing to do. There's no point at this stage throwing away all the work unless it's critically flawed beyond all sort of prospect of pulling it back. And in your case, this isn't going to happen, because you just need to show as a foundation that you can approach research in a reasonably sensible and appropriate way. So at this stage, your dissertation title and question may change entirely. It's not a problem. Don't worry. And then you're going to write it up. You're going to produce some sort of output, and it could be, in this case, your written up dissertation document. All this is underlined by the importance of research ethics. As you'll see from my project management video, this absolutely needs to be thought about at the stage of doing your literature review, defining your question. You're going to have to get clearance for your research project before you go out into the field and start generating data with human subjects. If you're finding secondary data in newspapers, reports, documents, that doesn't matter so much. You can look at a document. There's probably going to be no harm ever created out of that. So that can start, but you must absolutely not engage with any people in a research process until you have your clearance. Well, should have maybe split this video into a few little bits, but let's press on. Doing your literature review, and this is something that a lot of you are doing now, has a number of functions. And the first function is finding out these. Any thoughts? If we were in a classroom, I'd be asking for ideas, getting you to discuss. What I'm getting at here is the idea of concepts. What are the key concepts getting used by current experts in the field? In our case of dogs in Malawi, some of the key concepts, is a dog. That's not particularly controversial, but the concept of gross domestic product is, are people using GDP when they're looking at this relationship, or are they actually looking at gross national product? Are people talking about why one is better than the other? It's likely that they are. And if you're going to prove yourself, if you're going to make a useful contribution to this area, you need to understand what people are already thinking and knowing about this, what concepts they're using. And that's not to say you have to use the same concepts, but you should probably critically engage, which I'll come on to in a second. If everyone's using GNP and you have a reason to use GDP, you need to be able to say, I've read the literature, everyone's doing this. However, I've got a reason, and here's some other literature that supports that. So we're looking for key concepts. Don't know if this image brings anything to mind, something we've already mentioned, have a bit of a think. These are looking for theories. Is the current literature, the current knowledge drawing on one particular or a set of different theories that try to explain something? So this would be moving from the concepts of dogs and GDP to the theory that says, in every case we've looked at, where there are more dogs, there are more GDP. This is our theoretical explanation as to why some countries are richer than others. When some countries have more dogs, their economic activity is higher. This is our theory of explanation and prediction. So therefore, when we look at Malawi, our theory says if it's got a high number of dogs, it'll have a high GDP. Sort of moving over from individual concepts is the idea of sort of frameworks or conceptual frameworks. This is more, how is this different? Maybe it might have, so it's about collecting concepts together in a kind of map. And it may have a certain structure. So maybe we've got the concept of the social, the concept of the environmental, and the concept of the economic. And our conceptual framework is one of sustainable development, which says where you have all of these three things overlapping, that's what sustainable development is. It may be hierarchical, in which you say there are these different kind of conceptual factors. This is most important when we're looking at this outcome, that sort of thing. So we're looking around in the literature for this. Finally, in the literature, we're doing this kind of thing. Don't know if you have any thoughts about what this guy's doing. He's creating empirical knowledge. He's engaging with lived reality using his senses, in this case mainly his eyes. He's examining these rocks, creating empirical knowledge. In our literature review, so for our dogs and Malawi thing, we need to say, yeah, these are the concepts, these are the theories and the conceptual frameworks that are getting bandied about, and here are a range of empirical studies where people have gone out and done this measurement, they've done the analysis, and that supports the theoretical understanding. So we're showing that we have an awareness before we start our own research of all these areas. When you read, and particularly when you come to write this up in your literature review, it shouldn't just be a case of these people use these words and they say that this theory is this explains this relationship, etc. As with most academic work, it's about keeping a critical perspective which critiques and tries to test the ideas and findings of other people against one another, and to make your own contribution, your own unique argument. So look at these things critically, and when you write, think about phrasing it critically. What you want out of your literature review process is a question or a hypothesis or a project opportunity. So obviously you don't do the thing and then write it up and then do the next bit and write that up. The written dissertation is constantly evolving and changing, and even when you finished your whole project, you'll probably go back to your literature review and rewrite it. And the thing you want to do, because your dissertation needs an argument, it needs a point. Straight from the title, you want to be communicating to anyone that reads that what it is you want them to think after they finish reading it. So to have this normative agenda. So as part of your literature review, the argument you're making is a justification, a retrospective justification for the question that you've done, that you focused on, the area of research that you've undertaken. So you're finding out that this is an entirely unexplored topic. No one's ever thought about seeing if dogs affect GDP, and you're going to do it because you, for some reason, think it's important. That's a bit of a hard sell. But you might, again, as I mentioned, you might be saying, well, people have looked at every single country in the world, but never looked at Malawi. So let's test it here. Absolutely fantastic premise for a research dissertation. I'm going to test this theory deductively in a place that it's never been done before. I am going to test something in a new thematic context. Recycling, where people believe in recycling, they tend to do it. Maybe in that case, where people believe in switching electricity companies to a greener one, they tend to do it. Let's go and examine that. Geography I've done. I found I'm really interested in a specific thing. I found one example where someone's investigated it in a country. I'm going to go off and do a survey of all the countries to see if we can do some inductive research. Something like that. It is also perfectly possible to say there's a paper that there's this whole general interest in the relationship between dogs and GDP. People have looked at the country of Malawi, and I haven't read the study. I'm not too happy because they looked at, let's say, GDP instead of GNP. So I'm going to change it slightly. Or they did GDP. I'm going to look at GDP, but I'm going to use a different set of data. Or I'm just going to repeat the same thing with the same data, because I have reason to believe that I might get a different outcome. Particularly this might be the case with natural science. People have found this drug works to this effect. I'm going to take a different sample of people and repeat it. So it depends on our disciplines a little bit. But that's one thing we want out of our literature review. The other thing we want out of our literature review is communicating and understanding. What are the concepts, the frameworks, the theories that are getting used? How are they getting put together? Can we do it in a different way? Can we bring theories from one field of study into another and say, right, let's test this? Can we use concepts from geography, suddenly in politics and economics, to create some kind of new question or new possible explanation or theory or whatever that we can test it. So this is the arguments that we want to see running through your dissertation. I think this is now my final slide, and this is to give you a sense of where we're going. And I know I've said this to a lot of you. 9,000 words, I think it's 9 or 8,000 words, sounds like a lot to write. It's double the amount you've probably ever written before. But I can absolutely guarantee you the problem you will have is writing under the word limit, not writing up to it, unless you're particularly lazy or not very imaginative, if I'm being honest. But you guys you're going to have this formal problem. Think about it like this. You're probably going to want to write an introduction of about 1,000 words for a classic research dissertation, because this needs to summarize the entire thing. And you're doing a lot of work. That takes quite a lot of time. So it's sort of a book, a bit like an introduction to a book. You're saying, this is the broad background. This is why economic development is really important for sustainable development. Through the literature review in chapter 2, it shows that one of the most important variables is probably the number of dogs in the country, but people tend to use GDP, not GNP, and therefore I'm going to use this. And then you can see how I kind of this evolved in my research methodology chapter, where I'm going to talk about maybe my epistemological and ontological position, which I'll maybe talk about in another video, what that's all about. And I'll describe that I did a survey, blah blah blah. You soon get to 1,000 words just summarizing a big project. Literature review. You've got to go out there. You've got to read. You've got to show that you know all the existing knowledge up to, or the important existing knowledge up to a point. We're talking 2,500 words, and that's not a long piece of work. You've done that before. Research methods. Going to write that up. Going to be about 1,000 words. Then you're going to start getting into presenting your data and analyzing it. That may be split depending on what your question is, what your subject area is, what your supervisor's advice is. But I mean, we're easily talking 2,500 words there. That's sort of the intellectual bulk of your contribution. And then, of course, you need a summary at the end, because that's the classic structure: introduction, main body, conclusion. Here, you're going to be summarizing. You're going to be saying, "Yeah, this was my question. These are the things I found out. These are probably maybe at this point the policy implications. I found out that, yeah, in Malawi, it's true. High amount of dogs, pretty high GDP, actually fits quite nicely with a regression compared with other countries. And therefore, we're starting to have reason to believe that there might be something causal going on here. We could do some more research. Let's do some qualitative research to follow dogs around and see how it is they're contributing to GDP or promoting GDP, so we can understand the detail." We might have reached a stage where we're saying, actually, yeah, this is very, very likely to be causal. We've got high sort of certainty that we know what's going on here. Therefore, maybe if there are countries that have less dogs, if we leave some more dog food around, the economic growth will suddenly take off. So, conclusion: start to bring it back to the importance of the world and make some recommendations. I think that's everything I wanted to say. I hope that was useful, if not a bit rapid. I hope I haven't oversimplified anything too much or confused anyone. If you do have questions, please put them up on the forum, and I'll try to respond as best I can. But for now, good luck with it all.